Have you ever felt completely drained, not just physically, but in a way that no amount of sleep can fix? A fatigue that goes beyond your body, a tiredness of life itself. When everything seems meaningless, what's left? Nietzsche believed that this deep exhaustion, this weariness of the soul, isn't the end but a starting point. What if, instead of giving in to this heaviness, we could find, within this exhaustion, a chance to be reborn and create new meanings for everything? That feeling that nothing seems worthwhile might actually be the beginning of something greater. But how do we achieve this? And how can this philosophy help us when everything seems hopeless? Existential fatigue isn't just the physical tiredness we feel after a long day. It's a deeper weariness, a sense of being drained, as if life itself has lost its meaning. You might have felt this when you questioned why you keep following a routine that no longer brings you joy. Waking up, going to work, completing tasks, it all feels mechanical, as if the purpose behind these actions has vanished. This feeling can arise when the old values that guided us, like career goals, family expectations, or even life ideals, lose their significance. Nietzsche saw this fatigue as a symptom of a crisis of meaning, but he didn't think of it as a failure. On the contrary, for him, this exhaustion represents the beginning of something new. When life loses its luster, that's precisely when we have the opportunity to recreate our values, to give authentic meaning to our lives. Think about times of personal crisis, a job that no longer inspires you, strained relationships, or even the loss of something that used to be essential. This fatigue, rather than being an ending, can serve as a launching pad for transformation. Overcoming this exhaustion isn't about escaping it, but using it as fuel to create something new. Nietzsche believed that, instead of settling for a feeling of emptiness, a person should harness it to rise above. Nihilism finds strength in their exhaustion and reinvent their existence. Nietzsche believed that the essence of being human isn't about finding a fixed identity or an unchanging purpose, but about living based on what he called the will to power. This will is the natural drive that pushes us to grow, overcome obstacles, and assert our existence in the world. We are not static, and our identity shouldn't be viewed as something permanent. Instead, life is a continuous process of transformation. For Nietzsche, humans are always shaping and recreating themselves through the challenges they face. This means that the self isn't something fixed but a dynamic construction, constantly in motion. In our daily lives, this reflects in the small battles we fight, whether it's the struggle to improve at something, confront fears, or change habits that no longer serve us. According to him, life is about this ongoing process of overcoming. It's not just about surviving, but about finding ways to grow and affirm our individuality despite the pressures and expectations society places on us. True power lies not in conforming to predefined definitions of who we should be, but in constantly reinventing ourselves. Nietzsche invites us to embrace this process, to see life as a series of challenges that propel us to become more authentic and expansive versions of ourselves. For many, the ego is seen as an enemy, a part of ourselves that needs to be suppressed to achieve inner peace or harmony. Various philosophies and spiritual traditions emphasize the need to transcend the ego, to overcome it in order to reach a state of enlightenment. However, Nietzsche offers a radically different perspective. He believes that the ego isn't something to fight against, but something to empower. From the ego, we find the strength needed to affirm life, to shape the world around us according to our own will. Nietzsche didn't view the ego as an obstacle, but as a vital force. In practice, this means that the ego, instead of being a source of separation or pride, can be the key to our self-overcoming. What he proposes is that we use the ego as a tool for creation, not destruction. When we affirm the ego, we are asserting our will to power, the impulse that drives us to grow, seek new horizons, and challenge the limitations imposed on us by both others' expectations and our own insecurities. Think about everyday life. How often do we feel pressured to fit into molds that aren't our own? society, family, the workplace, they all seem to have an idea of who we should be. If we accept the idea of denying the ego, we might give in to these pressures, trying to become what others expect of us. However, Nietzsche suggests the opposite. He encourages us to use the ego to resist these impositions and assert our own authenticity. Instead of suffocating who we are, we should embrace the ego and direct it toward transforming the reality around us. The ego is what gives us the strength to say no to what suffocates us and yes to who we truly want to be. This doesn't mean that the ego should become a source of arrogance or isolation. Nietzsche's point is that by embracing the ego, we can affirm life in a way that doesn't conform to pre-established rules. It's an invitation to use the ego rather than being used by it to create a more authentic path. For Nietzsche, the ego is the key to shaping our reality instead of passively accepting our circumstances. Nietzsche introduces a powerful concept that may seem contradictory at first: amor fati, or love of fate. Unlike many philosophies that encourage the pursuit of an ideal reality or the escape from suffering, Nietzsche proposes something revolutionary. He suggests that we should love life exactly as it is, with all its difficulties, imperfections, and challenges. For him, transcendence doesn't come from escaping circumstances or finding a hidden meaning in things, but from affirming life in its entirety. It's about accepting our fate, not as something imposed upon us, but as something we can embrace, shape, and, most importantly, love. In daily life, this philosophy can seem challenging. After all, how can we love what causes us pain or frustration? Nietzsche would argue that it's precisely at this point that we find true transcendence. By accepting life as it is, with all its imperfections, we stop fighting against the inevitable and start to see difficulties as integral parts of the human experience. Instead of resisting the things that bother us or trying to change them at all costs, we learn to grow with them. What was once viewed as an obstacle becomes an opportunity for growth. For example, think about those situations where we feel trapped in circumstances beyond our control, like a job that suffocates us, a relationship that feels worn out, or the constant pressure to be something we're not. Amor fati invites us to look at these experiences not with resentment or frustration, but with active acceptance. This doesn't mean conforming. It means affirming these situations as part of our evolution process. By embracing everything that happens to us, we start to see that life, in its entirety, is worth living. For Nietzsche, true transcendence isn't about finding a perfect reality or waiting for life to align with our desires. It lies in affirming life as it is, accepting our fate, and finding beauty even in the most challenging moments. By doing this, we free ourselves from the illusion that life needs to be different to be good and begin to live more fully, embracing our existence with all its nuances. Nietzsche was always critical of the social masks we wear in our daily lives. He believed that the roles we play in society are largely constructions imposed by external forces that often suffocate our true selves. These masks, which seem necessary for social interaction, end up distancing us from our most authentic essence. According to Nietzsche, we live in a world where conformity to others' values and expectations is seen as a virtue. However, by submitting to these social roles, we often deny our own will to power, our ability to create and assert our individuality. In everyday life, this manifests in the small concessions we make to be accepted. We behave differently at work, at home, with friends, or with family. Sometimes, these masks are so automatic that we don't even realize we're wearing one. For instance, how many times have we acted in a certain way just because it was expected, rather than because it truly reflected who we are? Nietzsche argues that this constant adaptation to social norms leads to a kind of existential fatigue. In trying to be everything for everyone, we end up losing ourselves. For Nietzsche, the true overcoming of existential fatigue comes from breaking free from these masks. We need to reject the social roles imposed on us and create our own path. one that aligns with our will to power. This doesn't mean we should isolate ourselves or reject interaction with others. Rather, we must have the courage to assert our authenticity, even if it goes against external expectations. This act of rejecting social masks is ultimately a way to free ourselves from the pressures that prevent us from living fully and authentically. The idea of breaking away from social roles can be frightening, as they provide us with a sense of belonging. However, for Nietzsche, true freedom can only be found when we are true to ourselves, without fear of judgment or exclusion. By liberating ourselves from these masks, we begin to assert who we truly are, and in doing so, we overcome the fatigue that comes from trying to live a life that doesn't belong to us. For Nietzsche, true freedom isn't just about superficial choices or following our momentary desires. He believed that authentic freedom lies in our ability to continuously recreate the self, freeing ourselves from the limitations imposed by society, traditional morality, and even ourselves. In his view, we are beings in constant transformation, and life can only be fully lived when we embrace this change. The individual who truly wishes to be free must be willing to surpass the definitions given to them and recreate themselves, aspiring to the ideal of the Übermensch, the Overman, someone who transcends the limitations of their time and creates new values. In everyday life, the idea of recreating the self can seem like a challenge. After all, we are constantly surrounded by expectations and rules, often accepted without question. From a young age, we learn what is considered right and wrong, what is expected of us, and we end up shaping ourselves according to these standards. But Nietzsche encourages us to break these chains and explore the freedom to recreate ourselves, to reinvent ourselves whenever necessary. He reminds us that we are not stuck in a single identity or a single path. We can and should challenge ourselves to go beyond what society and tradition say we should be. Imagine those phases in life when everything seems to change: a new job, the end of a relationship, a move to a new city. Instead of trying to cling to the self we were before these changes, Nietzsche invites us to see these situations as opportunities to recreate ourselves. True freedom lies in realizing that we have the power to redefine who we are and what we want at any moment. And this doesn't just mean changing superficially. It means deeply questioning our values, beliefs, and what truly motivates us. This process of recreation requires courage, as challenging what we've always known can be uncomfortable. However, Nietzsche believes that this discomfort is the price of true freedom. By embracing our capacity for continuous transformation, we not only free ourselves from limitations imposed by others, but we also liberate ourselves from our own internal restrictions. For him, freedom isn't about conforming to a static definition of the self, but about allowing ourselves to be a project in constant evolution, always creating new meanings and values.